Greetings, friends and family. Welcome back to another episode of A Pretty Lie Instead of an Ugly Truth. Without further ado, let's get back to the story.
Now, out of the 20 women that were now forced to be sex slaves for Cortez and his crew, there was one woman in particular by the name of Malinche who stood out among all the rest. You see, unlike the other women, Malinche could speak the native languages of the Aztec and the Mayan. This was invaluable to Cortez.
So with Malinche able to speak Mayan and Aztec, and Aguilar, who's able to speak Mayan and Spanish, Cortez now had the winning cards in his hand.
And so, with his translators on board his ship, Cortez and his crew moved forward with their expedition. And in April 1519, Cortez and his crew sailed across the Gulf of Mexico to modern-day Veracruz. Once in Veracruz, Cortez met local natives. They were working on the land in order to pay local tribute to the Aztec Empire.
So thanks to Malinche's translations, Cortez now knew what the locals were thinking. And apparently, they had an issue with their emperor, Moctezuma. In addition, Cortez now knew the Aztecs' geographical location.
Now, unbeknown to Cortez, Montezuma, the emperor, had spies everywhere. Knowing that the Conquistadors had an insatiable appetite for gold thanks to his spies, Montezuma sent an emissary with gifts to Cortez and his crew. These gifts were given to Cortez on one condition, that Cortez put an end to his expedition and not come to the city's capital, Tenochtitlan. However, Cortez disregarded the request and decided to march towards the city anyway. He let the emissary know that he wanted to pay tribute to Montezuma personally.
So I know some of you may be thinking, how did Cortez walk into the Aztec Empire with only a couple hundred guys and take over, when the Aztec Empire clearly had them outnumbered?
Now, if you look at this objectively, the Spaniards should not have been a threat to Montezuma. You see, Cortez barely had an army of 500 men compared to the hundreds upon thousands of Aztec warriors, and yet Montezuma feared Cortez. You see, Cortez had arrived during a season when the Aztec calendar did not allow him to prepare or wage war. In addition, Cortez had arrived during a sacred year on the Aztec calendar, the year when the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return. You see, an ancient prophecy foretold that the bearded and feathered god Quetzalcoatl would return on a ship from the east to take back and rule the land of the Aztecs. Cortez had come from the east. He was bearded, and he had arrived in 1519, the exact same year and date of the Aztec prophecy.
So now I'm going to take the opportunity to tag out. Have S come finish the story.
So eventually, as time passed, Cortez and his crew decided to march up the coast of Zempuela. It was here that Cortez figured that he would be able to strengthen his stronghold by recruiting the local natives, who also had a particular problem with the Aztecs' tribute system. So, in the summer of 1519, Cortez made an alliance with the ruler of Zempuela. To show that he was down for the cause, the chief of Zempuela bestowed Cortez with 400 native porters that would now carry his advanced weaponry for him. With this new transportation system in place, Cortez continued his journey to the city's capital. Now, contrary to common belief, most historians will give you guys a fictitious narrative and tell you that most of the individuals who were at Zempuela ultimately joined Cortez's group on their own volition, but that couldn't be more further from the truth. If the individuals at Zempuela didn't join Cortez's stronghold, they were ultimately murdered. Now, on his way to the Aztec Empire, Malinche, Cortez's translator, decided to tell him about the Tlaxcalan clan, who was actually one of the local enemies of the Aztec people. You see, Malinche also thought it would be a good idea if Cortez decided to align himself with the Tlaxcalan clan so that way he could ultimately strengthen his stronghold once again. Cortez's next stop would be Tlaxcala, home of the Aztecs' greatest rivals. Though surrounded by subjects of the Aztec Empire, the Tlaxcalan clan remained independent. Cortez sent a message to the chief requesting a meeting. The Tlaxcalan clan rejected this overture. They answered with wave after wave of their best warriors. Unfortunately, this strategy wasn't very effective against the artillery of the Spaniards. In addition to that, the sound of the artillery also caused the local natives to panic. Their confusion made them easy targets for mounted conquistadors. With the body count climbing, the chief of Tlaxcala quickly surrendered to Cortez. Armed with his translators, Cortez demanded that the Tlaxcalans join his army, and a deal was struck for a united march against the Aztecs. Now, I want to take the opportunity to stop the story in order to put a few things into perspective. When Cortez first came to Mexico, he initially had 500 soldiers. Then he was able to ascertain 400 additional soldiers from the Zempuela tribe. And now he had an additional 1,000 soldiers from the Tlaxcalan clan. Now, I hate to say this, but I have to go on record to say that this deadly alliance or unity was a brilliant move on Cortez's part. You see, the Tlaxcalan clan were some of the biggest and baddest warriors around in all of Mexico. and now they were part of Cortez's team. And so, on October 12, 1519, Cortez and his crew headed over to Cholula, the last city before the Aztec capital. Now, when Cortez arrived in the city with his newly acquired men, he was immediately greeted by nobles, merchants, and local townspeople. And before these individuals could get to talk or know what Cortez wanted, he immediately had them all murdered. Thousands of innocent women and children were burned, shot, and cut into pieces by Cortez and his soldiers. And he did this for no reason at all, other than to steal and pillage from these innocent people. And if anybody at home thinks I'm kidding and making this up, here's a historian's account of what transpired.
Shortly after entering Cholula, there's a massacre in which a few thousand people are killed.
The surprised natives were no match for the Conquistadors, especially with their new Tlaxcalan allies by their side.
The Tlaxcaltecs had allied with the Spaniards, didn't necessarily trust them, didn't necessarily know if they were allies, and part of their demand for this alliance was go down and massacre these people.
News of the massacre spread quickly. For the Spaniards, it began a pattern of using terror as a weapon.
I think he's sending a message. If you're with us, you're fine. But if you're against us, watch out, because we're coming.
And for the disbelievers at home who still don't believe that all of this stuff is transpiring, don't worry, I got you.
Cortez then began his march of death from town to town using deception, turning Aztec against Aztec, killing with a kind of deliberateness that accompanies a strategy to paralyze the will of the population by a sudden, frightful deed. And so, in Cholula, he invited the headmen of the Cholula nation to the square, and when they came with the thousands of unarmed retainers, Cortez's small army of Spaniards posted around the squares with cannons, armed with crossbows, mounted on horses, and massacred them down to the last man. Then they looted the city and moved on.
And here's another nail in the coffin, baby.
Cortez commanded a musket to be fired as a signal for slaughter, which was waited for us. We executed their punishment on them in a manner in which they will ever remember, for a number of them were killed by us instantly, and a man afterwards burned alive, very contrary to the expectations they informed from their promises of their gods. About 6,000 Cholulans were put to death on this occasion. Within 2 hours of our allies, the Tlaxcalan arrived and made a desperate slaughter of them in the streets.
So now I want to take the opportunity to stop the story again in order to point something out so the viewers at home can know why this is so important. Now at the time, it was estimated that the Cholula's population was anywhere from 30 to 50,000 people, making it the largest Mesoamerican city of all time in 1519. And if they were all killed down to the last man, as the books actually stated, that would imply that 50,000 people died just for a little bit of gold. Ah, man. All right. But I digress. Let's get back to the story.
Now, after murdering the Cholula people, burning their holy temples to the ground, and stealing all of their gold, Cortez made his way to the capital in order to finish what he started. Now, most historians to this very date are perplexed as to why Montezuma allowed Cortez and his troops to march towards the capital instead of just sending a handful of troops to kill his syphilis-having ass. And my response to this question will be this: Montezuma was not a savage or a person who wanted to hurt people. He wanted peace, not violence like the Conquistadors. He wasn't a violent murderer like Hollywood movies would make you believe he was. And the reason we know he wasn't any of those things is because he didn't send warriors to kill Cortez's ass when he clearly could have done it multiple times in the story.
So now I think this is an appropriate time in order to stop the story, in order to read a passage from Bernal Diaz's book, so that way everybody at home can get a visual idea as to how pretty and majestic the Aztec city was, and what the Europeans initially thought when they first saw it with their own eyes.
When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land and that straight and leveled causeway leading to Mexico, we were amazed and said that it was like an enchantment. On the accounts of great towers and quays and buildings rising from water and all built of masonry. And some of our soldiers even asked whether that the things that they had saw were not a dream. I do not know how to describe it. Seeing things, as we did,
that had never been seen or heard before, not even dreamt about. Now, contrary to common belief, the meeting between Hernan Cortez and Montezuma was not one of hostility. In fact, it was one of a royal event. Now, armed with his two translators, Aguilar and Malinche, the two greeted each other with gifts.
Cortez was quite a manipulator and quite savvy. He knows how to motivate people, and the objective is gold, and that's what, of course, was the prime motivation.
Aztec Emperor Montezuma, the richest, most powerful man in the Americas, ruler of 25 million people. He's welcomed Cortez and his men into his palace, a mistake that will change the fate of a continent.
Their numbers were small. How could they constitute a threat when you have an army that's 1,000 times, 10,000 times larger than the few hundred souls that they brought, right?
Cortez's plan? Kidnap the emperor.
Part of his calculation was, if we can show that we can take over at this level, incarcerate the head of the empire, maybe the rest of the dominoes will fall.
Montezuma's treasuries are filled with gold. The Spanish lust for plunder astonishes the Aztecs. An eyewitness reports,
"They snatched up the gold like monkeys. They were swollen with greed. They hungered for that gold like wild pigs."
Now I have to stop the story and ask a serious question for all my viewers at home. What the hell is going on in these people's mind? Montezuma and his group threw them a party, allowed them into their home, fed them, gave them gifts, allowed them in the capital when they murdered all of his people as a peace offering. And instead of allowing this to just pass over and move on, Cortez decided to capture this man and hold the king hostage in his own kingdom when he is severely outnumbered. Montezuma had millions of soldiers, and Cortez had less than 1,900 people with him. And you're going to capture and hold a king hostage in his own city? Are you insane? And get this, after they kidnapped and held the Emperor Montezuma hostage in his own home, Cortez issued an order to have all of the men build crosses and place Christian icons all over the Aztec sacred temple. His men then destroyed all of the Aztec idols and holy books that contain vast record of their people's history. Now, just when you think things couldn't get any worse, check this out. Now, on April 1520, a new threat to Cortez arrived. An arresting party made up of 900 conquistadors landed on the coast. The captain of the arresting party was Panfilo de Narvaez, one of the biggest and nastiest conquistadors on the entire Spanish roster. Now, on orders from Velazquez, Narvaez was to find Cortez and hang him. Now, if anybody remembers my last episode, Diego Velazquez did not give Cortez authorization to go to Mexico. In all intents and purposes, he shouldn't even have been there. So with this being said, Velazquez now was sending his group of soldiers to come there and to execute Cortez for acts of treason. Now, instead of waiting for Narvaez to find him, Cortez decided to bring the drama to his front door. So on May 27th, 1520, Cortez left 120 of his conquistadors to hold Montezuma in the capital hostage while he took care of Narvaez in the east.
Cortez races down to the coast, meets them, talks to them, and convinces them with money that they should join his enterprise and become entrepreneurs with him. that he has found much more wealth than was available in Cuba, that wealth will make them very comfortable in life, and he is willing to buy them with all kinds of special deals.
So on May 28, 1520, Cortez led a surprise attack on Narvaez. Now the battle was vicious, but Cortez easily got the upper hand. You see, the men that Cortez paid off switched sides mid-battle. By dawn, Narvaez was wounded and captured, and his army had now joined Cortez. Now, just when you think things couldn't get any worse, check this out. Now, back in the city's capital, a new problem was developing. The Aztecs were preparing for a sacred feast. The Aztec citizens created images of their gods and beat drums in the street in order to celebrate this illustrious event. The man that Cortez left in charge, Pedro de Alvarado, wasn't sure what was happening, and when the Aztecs gathered in the square to celebrate this illustrious event, he interpreted this behavior as threatening. He believed that the Aztecs were preparing a surprise attack on him and his men. Surrounded by 500,000 Aztecs, Alvarado ordered his men to strike first.
He pulled his troops up around the 3 gateways to this courtyard and just opened fire and killed many people.
Alvarado and his men slaughtered all of the nobles and priests. Then the conquistadors killed any Aztec citizen within reach. Cortez received word of the massacre. He was told that Alvarado and his men were alive but surrounded. The conquistador rushed back to Tenochtitlan with his reinforced army. It was a shock to Cortez and his new conquistadors when they found they had to fight their way back into the city. What followed was organized urban warfare. The conquistadors and the Aztecs fought throughout the city. Warriors fell on both sides. The Aztecs would celebrate their dead and then immediately return to fighting. The Aztecs employed their own form of psychological warfare. They used ritual drumming and rolled severed heads down the street to harass the trapped and exhausted conquistadors. A frustrated Cortez forced the imprisoned emperor to try to pacify his people. What happened when Montezuma addressed his people is one of the most controversial events in the history of Mexico.
According to the Spaniards, he's out there trying to calm people down, and his own people throw rocks at him, hit him in the head, and then he dies a few days later from those wounds. Other people say that the Spaniards stabbed Moctezuma to death, and so there are 2 conflicting stories to the same event. Was Moctezuma killed by his own people when they rejected his authority, or did the Spaniards do him in after they realized he was of no use?
Now, for my viewers at home who may be a little lost with the story, I want to do my best to give you guys a recap and try to make it as simplistic as possible so you know what's going on at this particular point in time in the story. So far in the story, the conquistadors came to the Aztec capital, kidnapped the king Montezuma, forced Christianity upon them, a religion that none of these Latin American people knew anything about, destroyed their religion in sacred temples, murdered them in the street for celebrating their customs, stole all of their gold, raped the majority of their women, and when they finally decided to fight back because they were tired of these motherfuckers, Cortez and his group forced the king Montezuma to pacify his people. And when that didn't work, they stabbed him to death or made up this fictitious story and said that his own people threw a rock at his head and killed him. But again, for the 100th time, I digress. Let's keep it moving. Let's move on with the story. Now, to save his life and the life of his men, Cortez knew that he would have to find a way out of Tenochtitlan, and he had to do it fast. So Cortez and his men packed up as much gold as they could carry and bolted towards the causeway leading out of the capital. Now, unfortunately for Cortez, an Aztec citizen spotted him and sounded the alarm. And within minutes, the Spaniards were completely surrounded from every angle by war canoes. Now, the Spaniards did their best to fight off as many of the Aztecs as they could at that particular point, but they were severely outnumbered. You see, the Aztecs kept coming wave after wave after wave, and although Cortez murdered as many of them as he could not fight over 10,000 Aztec warriors armed to the teeth with bow and arrows, canoes, and spears. And as a result, Cortez ultimately lost more than half of his troops that day. This marked the first time in history that the Spaniards had to run with their tails tucked between their legs in order to escape the city. As a result, also, Cortez lost more than half of the gold during that point in time. Now, once Cortez made it out of the capital, you would think that he would count his blessings and go back home like any sensible person would do, seeing how he narrowly escaped with his life. But nope, not Cortez. He still had one trick up his sleeve. You see, Cortez still wanted to go back to Tenochtitlan in order to ascertain the gold that he lost. So Cortez went back to his camp, retrieved more dogs, weapons, cannons, boats, and things of that nature, and planned his final assault on Tenochtitlan. But before Cortez decided to go back to Tenochtitlan, the city's capital, he decided to strengthen his stronghold once again. So Cortez sent out a messenger to the natives of Tepeyaca, a local tribe that wasn't too far from his camp. According to the messenger, Cortez demanded that every able-bodied man that was a part of Tepeyaca join Cortez's army. When the Tepeyaca refused to comply with Cortez's demand, the Spaniards massacred the Tepeyaca clan right down to the last man. Look, every time I do one of these documentaries, I try to do my best to be as unbiased as I can. But this time around, I'm going to call a spade a spade. I really don't care about being politically correct, and I don't really care about being unbiased at this particular point in time. Hernan Cortez is honestly one of the biggest cowards I've ever seen in quite some time. You didn't have the gall or the strength to beat the Aztec Empire or the Mexica clan by yourself, so you tried to forcibly get another clan to join your arsenal so that way you could have a chance to steal these people's gold. And when this other clan didn't want to join you, you murdered them and all of their family members right down to the last man? This is some straight up bitch shit. I'm sorry. Straight up bitch shit. You can't beat them with your own two fists, so you're going to try to force another clan to fight your war for you? And if they don't comply, you kill them? Okay, Cortez. I see how you guys get down. And get this, because Cortez wasn't able to get the men and the supplies that he needed in order to strike back at the Aztecs, Cortez sent word to his father back home that he needed help. Yeah, you guys heard me right. He sent word to his dad that he needed help. A grown-ass man called his dad for help because he couldn't win a fist fight with these people. And so his dad sent him a large ship filled to the brim with muskets, swords, crossbows, dogs, and horses. Now, armed with all of these weapons that his daddy sent him, Cortez made his way back to the capital in order to finish what he started. Now, most historians believe that even though Cortez was able to ascertain all of this equipment from his father back home and having the Tlaxcalan people on his side, that still was not enough for him to tactically best the superior might of the Aztec people. If it wasn't for the next factors that played out the way they did, Hernan Cortez would have definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, lost the war.
The third surprise was a new and unexpected weapon, smallpox, which the Spaniards had unknowingly brought to Mexico. It had already killed tens of thousands in the Aztec capital. Among those killed by the virus was Montezuma's brother, Cuitlahuac. His cousin, Cuauhtemoc, became the new Aztec emperor. In the spring of 1521, Cortez and his replenished army returned to the Valley of Mexico.
He begins to win allies around the lake, one by one, to come over to his side for the final attack of Tenochtitlan.
The siege of Tenochtitlan began.
There are only 3 major causeways that go into this city, and the Spaniards built 13 brigantines, mounted a cannon in each one, and basically were able to cut off the city from supplies from outside.
The Conquistadors and the Tlaxcalans made daily raids into the city.
As the Spaniards and their allies fought their way into the city over a 3-month period, they started laying waste to all the buildings, because if they didn't, they would be attacked from those very buildings the next time they pulled in.
During the 80-day siege, Cortez's strategy crippled the Aztecs. Smallpox continued to ravage the population, and the naval blockade prevented the Aztecs from getting food or supplies. Even when the Aztecs knew their city was lost, the Emperor Cuauhtemoc could not bring himself to surrender to Cortez. He was captured while trying to escape on 13 August 1521. After 2.5 years, his mission was accomplished. Cortez was the conqueror of Mexico.
The old temples will be destroyed, and the new church and municipal buildings will be built right in the very center of Mexico Tenochtitlan, and this becomes Mexico City, the center of this great viceroyalty that is called Nueva España, New Spain.
Part of Cortez's philosophy for New Spain was an intentional mingling of native and Spanish blood. A biological alliance was created between the conquerors and the conquered. Cortez himself had a child by Doña Marina, his native mistress and translator.
They establish a society wherein the sexual union is part of the base of that encounter, which is totally different from other types of colonization.
Cortez had this castle built for him just outside of Tenochtitlan. From this hilltop, he could survey all that he'd won. He was still under 40, but Cortez was the governor and captain general of New Spain. In 1528, Cortez returned to Spain, where he was granted the title Marquess of the Valley. Though he was initially well received, his new wealth did not buy him the lasting respect he desired. For Cortez, the conquest of Mexico proved to be his greatest achievement. He'd personally won more land and treasure for Spain than any other individual. Aztec gold, copper, and rare gems would be mined for centuries. The native people would convert to Christianity, and the entire Aztec empire would become New Spain. And Cortez would be hailed as one of the greatest conquerors in history.
And that, folks, is the story of Hernan Cortez. Attack of the Conquistadors, Volume 2 of 2 is officially complete. So what did we learn from all of this? What did we digest? What were we able to ascertain?
Well, to answer this question, we should take a look at the appropriately titled shitometer chart in order to weigh in and examine the amount of bullshit that all of the indigenous people had to endure. So, for the sake of staying chronological, let's combine the story so far. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and kidnapped the local inhabitants, stole all of their natural resources, viciously raped all of the local women, established the first sex trafficking ring, created a concentration camp where he forced natives to work in gold mines, created the transatlantic slave trade, spread diseases such as smallpox and syphilis, stole all of their gold, and killed more than 3 million Arawak people, wiping them off of the face of this earth. In 1504, Hernan Cortez landed in the Dominican Republic, where he was immediately offered a job by Diego Velázquez to conquer Cuba. From 1511 to 1518, Diego Velázquez and Hernan Cortez murdered all of the inhabitants, raped all of their women, and put the remaining survivors into slavery. In 1518, Diego Velázquez heard rumors about a city of gold in Mexico and ordered a few of his troops to investigate it. When they didn't return, he ordered Cortez and his men to conduct a rescue operation. Cortez had his own plans, however, and a mutiny followed. Cortez went to Mexico on his own volition, betraying Velázquez's orders, as all he wanted was the gold. In February 1519, Cortez landed in Mexico, where his spree of murder and chaos began. He raped all of the Mayan women, burned people alive, shot, stabbed, and hung all of the local inhabitants. On November 8, 1519, Cortez found the city capital, Tenochtitlan, where he murdered all of the inhabitants, raped all of their women, destroyed all of their religious and spiritual deities, forced Christianity upon them, murdered the emperor, spread smallpox, syphilis, gonorrhea, and other diseases upon the locals until they were all completely wiped out. So now that we understood what Columbus did, let's take a look at the United States and how they actually categorize or compartmentalize crimes for that matter. Now, throughout the United States, crimes are typically divided into various categories based on severity. 2 of these major categories are felonies and misdemeanors. Now, most states will typically divide felonies into 3 separate degrees: first degree, second degree, and third degree. First degree is typically the most serious out of all of them. Now, being convicted of a first-degree felony is a life-changing situation that can potentially land you in prison for years when the maximum penalty is imposed. Typically, a first-degree felony conviction carries a couple different possibilities, but some of the most common ones would be 20 years in prison and up to $25,000 in fines. Now, for the sake of being symmetrical, I'm going to take the opportunity today to use some of the United States first-class felonies in order to rank and critique Christopher Columbus as a whole. Now, in the murder and the rape category, I'm going to have to award Christopher Columbus with 5 shits out of 5 shits, seeing how he murdered more than 3 million people in less than 12 years. In addition to that, in the rape category, I gave him 5 shits out of 5 shits because he created the transatlantic slave trade, and he also made a sex trafficking business out of raping and sending young girls to Europe in order to fuel and create the global sex trafficking ring.
Now for the last three categories, kidnapping, burglary, and disease, I think it'll come at no surprise when I say that I'm going to hit him with 5 shits out of 5 shits, giving him the grand total of 25 shits out of 25 shits. I don't think I need to go into much detail to explain all of the horrendous and heinous things that Christopher Columbus did. 5 shits out of 5 shits is actually a far cry. He should be at like 10 shits out of 5 shits if I may be so frank myself. But I'm going to hit him with 5 in the kidnapping department, 5 in the burglary department, and 5 in the disease department. Now let's move on to Hernan Cortez and see how he fares when it comes to Christopher Columbus on the shit-o-meter chart. Now in the murder department, I'm going to hit Hernan Cortez with about 4 shits out of 5 shits. He murdered, most scholars believe he murdered about 300 to 400,000 people, putting him right behind Christopher Columbus, who actually murdered 3 million individuals. So I'm going to hit him with 5 shits out of 5 shits. And then the rape category, I'm going to put him at 3 shits out of 5 shits. You know what? Actually, I'll put him at about 4 shits out of 5 shits, excuse me, for the time being, for a couple of reasons. One, he didn't create a global sex trafficking organization, but he did do his best to rape a lot of the inhabitants in order to create a new, what he liked to say, race of people who followed Catholicism and followed his everyday will. Now for the last 3 categories, kidnapping, burglary, and disease, I have no choice other than to hit Hernan Cortez with 5 shits out of 5 shits. But in the disease category, I'm actually going to take the liberty to award Hernan Cortez with the highest honor of a cosmic shit, which gives him 1 additional shit point on the list, bringing him up to 24 shits out of 25 shits, making it 1 mark, or making his chart 1 mark, 1 point behind Christopher Columbus. For the disease category, he purposely knew, and a lot of his comrades purposely knew, that they were suffering from syphilis, gonorrhea, and other diseases, and they purposefully raped local natives knowing that they were sick with these diseases. So I have no choice but to hit him with a cosmic shit in order to bump him up 1 point, 6 out of 5. For that category. In the kidnapping section, he's going to have to get nothing less than a 5 for kidnapping Montezuma, the king of the Aztecs, or the Mexica people, in his own land. And then in regards to the burglary section, they stole just about everything that the local Aztecs and the Mayans had in their own land. All of their gold, all of their women, all of their children, all of their resources. Everything that they owned and possessed was ultimately taken and stolen from them by the Spaniards or the Conquistadors. So 5 out of 5 in that category.
Now, in the beginning of all this, I made a statement that we'd go through Cortez and we would explain why he's important to everybody in modern day who considers himself a Latino, a Hispanic, a Mexican, a Puerto Rican, anyone south of the border. Growing up in a Latino home, knowing Latino friends and other people, one thing that is unanimous among all Latinos is that Latinos speak Spanish. Another thing is that just about all Latinos, and what's really deep rooted in Latino culture, modern day culture, is Christianity and Catholicism. What I want you to understand is the only reason why you, a Mexican, Puerto Rican, anyone from the Caribbean, South America, whatever, the only reason you speak Spanish and the only reason you're a Catholic or a Christian and why it's so deep rooted in your tradition as a Mexican, Puerto Rican, or whatever in those respective cultures is because the Spaniards came over here long ago, completely destroyed and wiped out the native populations. Those bloodlines are gone. Their culture and who they truly were is gone. They don't exist anymore. And us modern day Latinos are a product of that destruction, that rape, that perversion, that greed. As you saw near the end of this, the Spaniards made sure to annihilate all the men, keep the women, and purposely breed with them, creating a new race the modern day Mexican people. And they did this in every other respective country. This eventually happened in Colombia and Brazil and all the other countries as well. The native populations are wiped out, the male lines are destroyed, the males of the Spaniards mate with the females of the native populations, and they create these hybrid people with hybrid cultures. And these cultures come from Spain. They come from Europe. Spanish, Catholicism, Christianity, all of that stuff, European. It's European. It's in many ways unnatural and artificial. If you notice, everything about these Spaniards, or even Columbus before them, and most of the Europeans who came over and conquested and did whatever they did, their actions, their thoughts, their methods were unnatural. They were destructive. They went against nature. I need you to understand this and really understand the life in the world that we live in now. The entire world was eventually corrupted, taken over, conquered, destroyed by Europeans in some way, shape, or form. We were going over South America to give you an example, and to give you an example of our history, because the same thing that happened in South America happened in North America with the English. That's another story. However, I just would like everyone to understand this. I mean, have you ever wondered why you speak Spanish? Have you ever wondered why you're a Catholic? I know it's because your parents were, and their 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 parents were, and it goes on and on and on. But you ever wonder why Spanish in Catholicism, which is a European language, I believe that Spanish has its roots in Germanic. It's a Germanic language. I could be wrong, but I know English is, and I know Spanish is similar to English. Most of those languages in Europe have Germanic origins. So you're speaking a Germanic, most likely a Germanic language, and you were worshiping and praying and following a faith, a religion that has its roots in Europe. But these things are in Mexico and South America. Now again, you guys know the conquistadors. You do know the general story possibly. The conquistadors came over and taught you guys this stuff. But what you're not getting is you only know it because your ancestors were killed, destroyed, and this was forced upon you. This wasn't your choice, and if it wasn't for them doing evil deeds, you wouldn't be who you are today. Is that God's plan? So you're telling me you're a Catholic, you're a Mexican Catholic, or you're a Puerto Rican Christian, or whatever you are, and you're happy about that, and you believe in this religion, and you believe in your culture, and you like speaking Spanish, you like all these things, but you're willing to accept that the only reason you exist and the only reason you know all these things and you're who you are today is built upon a foundation of pure evil. Next time you're in your temple or your church and you're listening to your pastor read from the holy book, and you get down on your knees and you're praying to white Jesus with his white father, the white Virgin Mary, white saints, the next time you're doing these things and you're saying your prayers in Spanish, possibly English, remember the reasons why this is even transpiring. Remember the reasons that Mexico City even exists. I mean, you know damn well that your ancestors would have never worshipped these types of things. Everything about these people they brought over, including some of their religious beliefs, were unnatural. Everybody else were pretty natural before European intervention. So the next time you're praying, ask yourself, would Montezuma approve? I can't stress this enough. I really need everyone to understand this. The original inhabitants of these lands would be turning over in their graves. Montezuma himself, wherever he may be now, would be looking down on Mexico, that's where the name comes from. He He'd be looking down on this place like, what the hell happened to this place? What you need to understand is these people, the Spaniards, purposely they eradicated the existence of these people. What did they do when they took over? Knock down their temples and just put up crosses. And if you didn't worship, if you didn't speak Spanish, if you didn't do what they wanted you to do, you're dead. So of course they went along with it. One thing I need you to understand. In order to erase an entire people off this planet, it's actually not that hard. What you do is, you go in, you kill all the adults. You kill all of them off. Everyone who knows everything. You keep a couple women. You reproduce with them. The offspring those women reproduce, you just teach them what you want to teach them. And you don't let them know where they really came from. This happens over generations, over hundreds of years. That's why everyone today doesn't know a goddamn thing about where they came from. You understand? The Puerto Rican people, the Mexican people, the Colombian people, they have long history of this deep-rooted culture, and everyone is so proud to be a Puerto Rican or a Colombian or a Mexican. They're so proud of it. I've heard people say, I'm a full-blooded Mexican. That doesn't make any sense. You have to understand that all modern people in the Americas, North America, South America, are a product and a hybridization of European conquest, and that everything you know today was forced upon your ancestors or they died. Let that sink in for just a second. I'm not trying to be, anti-religion or atheistic or anything. I'm speaking cold, hard facts. And if anyone wants to argue this, by all means argue it. Write us an email or something. We'll have S put an email or something, and you can rebuttal all the information we're giving you. Oh yeah, one more thing. When they were talking about how the Spaniards had the most advanced weaponry the world had ever seen, and when they brought it over, they were able to overpower the natives with this advanced weaponry. I don't want to use the term advanced. What's more accurate is their weaponry was unnatural. Again, I would like to stress that the behaviors, mentality, culture, everything that the Europeans did was unnatural, inhumane, against humanity, against nature. They had the concept of buying land and owning earth is a incredibly unnatural thing. Swords are unnatural. They don't come from the earth, at least not directly. They're a chemical process of different minerals melted together and then cooled to a certain... There's a whole bunch of science that goes behind creating metal, swords, armor, guns, gunpowder, cannons. Things created in an unnatural manner by unnatural people with unnatural thoughts, unnatural desires. The native people were natural. Everything they had came from the earth, degraded back to the earth. Feathers, bones, flint, wood, things of that nature. No guns, no metal, because there was no need for it. Does that make sense? Also, domesticated horses and domesticated dogs. I don't know if you know, but dogs are a mutant hybrid of, I suppose, wolves at some point. Dogs themselves are unnatural creatures. They only exist in the presence of humans. Let that sink in as well. My final note. What I'm all summing it all up is, know where you came from. Know what you're worshiping. Know what you're believing. Know what you're speaking. The languages and the religions and all these different things that every modern day person knows and does traditionally, taught at a young age, almost brainwashed in a way to do and learn and do all these things. You have to understand where it originally came from and how it doesn't make you who you are. Does that make sense?